Welcome, everybody. It's quite a crowd. It only holds 60 people in this room, so I'm going to do a quick count, and if there's 65, I'm going to have to ask 5 of you to... No, I'm only kidding. We'll be all right. Thank you again for joining. Today's panel is the topic of voice in healthcare, making it real. And just set the tone for what we'll be talking about today. Healthcare is a very, let me put it this way, voice in healthcare is very hot right now. And I don't think any of us in the room kind of have trouble making the connection between where voice can have an impact in healthcare. But what we want to do is really kind of assess where we are as an industry. And we're going to assess that through the lens and the perspectives of the esteemed panelists that you see here. My name is Nathan Treloar. I'm president and co-founder of Orbita. We're a software company based out of Boston, and we work with healthcare providers and pharmaceutical firms, anybody in the healthcare industry to tap into the value of voice-assistive technologies. We're exhibiting up in the exhibit floor. Come by and see us. That's all you're going to hear from me for the most part. I will ask the panelists to introduce themselves. But before I do, one sort of procedural change. We had one of our panelists, Bev Hardy from Brigham and Women's Hospital, was unable to get down here. I think, like many of us, has travel delays due to the weather. But we're very pleased to have Jen Warner from the Mayo Clinic stand in at the last minute. If you didn't see Jen speak yesterday, here's your chance to hear her wax poetic about voice and healthcare at the Mayo Clinic. Before we do the intros, I'm going to just do a few questions out of the audience. How many people are from the healthcare industry, or work actively in the healthcare industry? Okay, a little more than half, more or less. How many are in the pharmaceutical industry? Okay, 7 or 8 of you. How many of you work for a provider or are engaged with a provider in some capacity? Scott, raise your hand. Thank you. Jeez. You forgot who you work for? Scott from the Mayo Clinic. Isn't that a provider? How many are in the care service industry? In other words, you provide a service to healthcare providers or the pharmacy industry, so you're sort of an indirect provider to the industry. All right. Okay, thank you for that. And then how many are other? Okay. All right. How many are students? Okay, good. All right, that table over there, students table. Nice to see you guys here. Pay attention. It's going to be a test at the end of this. So about 40 minutes or so, we'll do a Q&A with the panelists here. And then we'll have time for questions. And I think there's going to be a microphone that we'll throw from one end of the room to the other. So not these microphones, other microphones. All right, well, let's get started. So I'm going to take a seat. If you hadn't noticed up on the job titles, well, they're all cut off. No, they're not. They're not cut off. Only Sarah's head is cut off. I apologize for Sarah. That's her. Now they can see your whole head up front here. One of the things you'll notice that the word innovation shows up. And I think it's fair to say that when it comes to voice technology, we're clearly in an area of innovation. It is still perceived as an area of innovation. I can tell you anecdotally, my company, most of the inroads that we've made into healthcare have been through teams that are sort of responsible for innovation. And actually, like I said, a few of the folks on the panel here are representative of that. It's just the nature of technology. And I think if you went back in time 5 or 10 years in the early days of mHealth, you would have seen the same thing. So that's where we are right now. But what I want to do is maybe, starting with you, Cris, given the lofty job title in digital innovation, maybe set the tone for where you think we are. What's your approach to innovation? How do you see voice as sort of a path to innovation at J&J?
Sure. So thank you, everyone, for picking our attendance in this session today. And we know there's a lot of other healthcare sessions going on right now. So
sorry to interrupt, Cris. I forgot to let you guys introduce yourself. We're going to go down. You answer the question, and then we're going to down introduce yourselves as you do. All right?
All right. So I'm Cris Luca. As you can see, my lofty title up here today. I represent J&J's external innovation arm here today. So J&J, obviously, 130 years of heritage in healthcare, largest healthcare company on the planet. And we're the most diversified healthcare company in the world. So really looking forward to telling you a little bit about our voice technologies, our approach to digital innovation, and thank you for the discussion.
I'm Sarah Lindenauer with Boston Children's Hospital. We have an innovation and digital health accelerator within the hospital, and I manage the accelerator program and oversee our portfolio from a product perspective. We've been pretty gung-ho on voice in healthcare since the early days, developing the actual first healthcare skill for the Alexa called KidsMD back in 2016. And have developed a number of additional skills that are more focused on clinicians as the end user and in-hospital use cases that we can talk through a bit today, but very keen on voice in healthcare and excited to be part of this panel today.
Hi, I'm Jessie Gatto. I'm a design strategist at Humana's Innovation Lab. At Humana, we have a bold goal about helping our members become more healthy, 20% more healthy by 2020. And the way that I play a role in that and the Innovation Lab is through healthcare services and looking at ways to support our sickest members, people with complex chronic illness, at home through emerging technology, developing new concepts, but really all focused on, how can we help these people maintain their health. We started our voice exploration back in 2016. So maybe after Sarah, but not much, not much. So it was pretty early on, and really initially we're just looking into broadly the experience and understanding voice interaction. We've since run 4 different tests, work with around 100 different members, for 3 months or more, kind of observing their use and their experience. Developed 6 custom apps, and then all the while, really focusing on what are we learning? How can we improve the experience? And so that's what I'm excited to share with all of you today. So grateful to be here. Thanks.
Great. And as he mentioned, I'm kind of pinch hitting here, so please bear with me. But I am Jennifer Warner. I'm a senior editor at Mayo Clinic. I am part of the voice strategy at Mayo Clinic in one very specific way. I actually create the content and work with people and help other people create content. I work primarily with consumer-facing products like the Mayo Clinic First Aid Skill for Alexa, and we're also currently working on converting a lot of our existing consumer content to first-party content that would be available on voice-enabled devices. Obviously, Mayo Clinic has a long history of innovation. There are over 100 different voice-related initiatives at Mayo Clinic, many at our Center for Innovation, where we're looking at things like markers in voice that can be indicative of different diseases that could have huge implications for telemedicine, as well as smart exam rooms and different things like that. But I'm specifically working on the consumer facing, but we have a lot of other people working on things as they relate to patient care as well.
100 different use cases, applications. How come I only know about 5 of them? Scott. Cris, back to that question.
Yeah,
Why don't you tell us about innovation at
Thank you.
J&J?
Of course. So innovation is obviously no stranger to J&J. Our whole company has been rooted in this. So over the past 130 years, we're really comprised of 250 operating companies across J&J in 3 big sectors. So most of the consumer products that many of you know that fill your homes, as well as the pharmaceutical businesses, including our medical device sector. So really, I think we have a unique lens across the human health continuum, ranging from transitions from babies and Band-Aids and Tylenol to how we sort of provide innovative medicines to cure and treat some of the world's most horrific diseases, as well as our orthopedics and surgical businesses. And so about 5 years ago, J&J sort of launched its latest chapter in innovation called Johnson & Johnson Innovation. So we've launched 4 innovation centers around the world. I'm based in Boston, which is our sort of East Coast regional hub. There's another one in San Francisco, one in London, and one in Shanghai. And really the whole intent was to really say, how can we embed ourselves and move to where innovation is happening instead of trying to do it all from headquarters? And so we said, let's be part of the ecosystem. One doesn't need to own the ecosystem, but we want to be embedded and see how we can orchestrate that to be both shaping as well as learning and developing essentially an external pipeline for the company. So we're about 300 people across this global network. We also launched a whole incubator platform called J-Labs. Have any of you heard of sort of J-Labs or J? Good. So we're getting on the map, but the whole point really is to make it dead easy for entrepreneurs to work with J&J. Pre sort of J&J Innovation, it was really a, try to network your way in. Do I knock on the door in New Brunswick? How do I get in, and how does this work? So it's really that human API approach to sort of streamlining a strategic external pipeline. I would say in general, so my focus is on digital innovation. And again, as I mentioned, technology doesn't really fall neatly within this strategy and within these sectors. And so I have really a unique vantage point to say, how does the sort of human health continuum, and where does technology belong from a patient-centric perspective, as opposed to, sort of, and I would caution as we even think about voice, sort of trying to throw voice or trying to throw these technologies at sort of a disease area. Where does it make sense instead of understanding the underlying disease? And so we try to take that lens every single day. Some of the more obvious spaces around voice for us are, I would say, naturally under the consumer health perspective, so trying to engage folks around different consumer health products that we have. I'd be happy to talk about some of those examples and some of the recent skills that we've launched. But I think, as a science-based company, we're obviously very interested in understanding early detection systems. And if you sort of think about the healthcare system as a whole, it's really not a healthcare system. It's really a sick care system. And so we're really in a reactive state of treating in sort of too late of a stage of innovation. So when we think of moving that earlier, we think of how can we really care for health, and that needs us to push sort of closer to the left and think about prevention and wellness and sort of catching diseases earlier. And I think voice has a big opportunity in that.
Same question.
Sure. Approach to innovation at Boston Children's. We are fortunate to have a team of about 50 that focus solely on bringing innovative technologies from outside within the hospital and innovative ideas from within the hospital, building that technology and bringing it outside, extending the sort of pediatric expertise, I guess, of children's beyond the hospital walls. So we take both a bottoms-up and tops-down approach to innovation in terms of constantly cultivating pain points and ideas from clinicians and people on the ground that are doing this work every day, as well as keeping an eye to the market with the help of our partners, what's out there, both within and outside of healthcare industry that we should potentially keep in mind. So we joke sometimes that our group is a matchmaker in terms of if we see an exciting startup and we know that a clinician or a department within the hospital is looking for a solution to a pain point they voice to us, we can facilitate that, and that's within a large organization been the fastest way for us to really move and get some of these technologies in the hospital and into specific departments. And I would say we generally like to implement quickly, learn quickly, iterate quickly, and so this sort of approach to innovation has allowed us to do that, and that's been no different with voice, I would say.
Yeah, and fail quickly, right? That's the...
Oftentimes.
Yeah, not that you guys do that often.
Oh, yeah.
This extra microphone here. Jessie, why don't you talk about, Jessie, from the perspective of Humana, obviously you guys can see that there's a diversity of participants here. From a payer, risk-bearing payer, how do you guys approach innovation, and maybe in the context of the work that you did a couple of years ago?
Yeah, so there are a number of different approaches. So I would say that we are, as an organization, very focused on user-centered design and trying to stay true to problems and addressing problems that we see with our member population and keeping them healthy. That can be a challenge sometimes, especially just because people see new solutions and they're like, okay, how can we apply this? So that's kind of, at least in my mind, a big part of our remit is just staying focused on what are we trying to accomplish. And then within the innovation lab, that can be a combination of different things that sounds actually quite similar. So we have a discovery network, Bay Area and Boston, looking at different startups, kind of identifying companies that might be relevant to some of our opportunity or problem spaces. And then we also do kind of ground up concept development, which is a lot of going out and speaking with our members, which is kind of one of the great parts about innovating healthcare at a payer is that you have all of these members that give you kind of an opportunity to try to make improvements on the ground and understand how they went. So so that's really the big focus for us.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I think, Jen, from a perspective of innovation, if it is the case that you're doing 100 different projects, I would say innovation, this is a strategic imperative for you guys.
Well, it's one of our founding principles is the needs of the patient come first, and so that's 150 years ago, and that really informs our mission at every step of the way. And we have a long history of innovation in not only patient care but education and research. So a lot of those We have a Center for Innovation. We're looking a lot at human augmented intelligence as well. How can we augment, or we already have a great collection of brain power. How can we augment that using machine learning in various applications for patient care? Research, huge implications for clinical trials, and tracking the progress of that, as some of the other speakers at this conference have talked about. And then what I work with is how can it affect the consumer, or potential patient population, and as well as addressing the needs of a sick community. How can we affect health and wellness behaviors with things like the skills on Alexa, as well as providing our trusted health information on more channels.
Yeah. So beyond institutionalizing innovation, which all these organizations have done, they have very specific methodologies for how technology makes its way in. And I think the theme I'm hearing, especially from Cris and Sarah, is there's sort of a matchmaking exercise, right? You have a line of business or a clinician in the organization that has a problem, and you have these technologies, and you guys are connecting the dots, as it were, with the specific methods and organizations that you have. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the use cases of voice. And I'm particularly interested in which ones seem to be percolating to the top of the list as the highest value or the easiest ones to tackle first. And then kind of related to that, what sort of justification do you need to produce in order to get the investment in these projects? And maybe we'll start with Jennifer, because you have 100 of them, and it's going to take you a while to get through them all, so go.
Well, I can say just, for top of mind, I know one that's just percolating to the top. We had a study published recently with some partners where we're looking at clinical markers of coronary artery disease in voice, and how that might have implications for telemedicine and health, so that you can easily see those implications there. That's a broadly available skill that you could use not just through voice assistance, but even just through telephone. Looking at these, you could synthesize that and analyze that as well.
I just want to make sure everybody understands what you're describing here. It's not an Alexa skill that she's describing. It's analyzing the acoustic properties of what's being said in order to predict some particular health concern. And this technology, for those of you not familiar, has really advanced a lot recently, and there's an incredible amount of interest in it. Voice and acoustics analysis, you know how voice recognition works, right? These devices now can tell if it's you or your spouse or somebody speaking to them. But what she's describing is they're able to detect through changes in inflection and tone, whether there's, for example, a probability of a heart attack or a stroke. So being predictive. So it's really interesting. And this is even beyond kind of where most of us are with respect to voice technology.
Right, so that's a huge, and that's outside my area, but that's something that's actively going on at the Center for Innovation at Mayo. For us, another, in terms of how we get buy-in and how we get this started, we had to adopt a crawl, walk, run approach in terms of using our consumer content. So we started with a flash briefing skill using the Mayo Clinic News Network on Alexa. Then we built out using our existing first aid content, when working with Nate here to develop the first aid skill for Alexa. And now, since we have this large health information library and we're a destination website for health information, we're working on providing voice optimized content from that health information library across multi-channel delivery, including voice for a variety of voice-enabled device providers. We really had to kind of show proof of concept early on to show that it was of value. We're aiming at using things that kind of give us the most bang for our buck, like what do we already have existing in-house and have the technology, and if we don't have the technology, then we're forming strategic partnerships, doing a bit of matchmaking to solve some of the problems that we might have. So that's kind of how we've approached it in various ways.
Yeah, good ones. Jess.
Yeah, so I guess in thinking about use cases for us, there are certainly big opportunities around, just generally reducing friction, repetitive tasks. We see that opportunity in specific places, but then at the same time, we think about voice as a channel, right? So there's not, we see opportunity across use cases. It really just depends on preferences. It depends on context. We want to create omni-channel experiences for our members. And so, there's kind of, a discussion, is it a solution in itself? And it does certainly enable certain solutions that wouldn't otherwise be an option. But then at the same time, it's also a channel. And if you can get to the point where it's just like having a conversation, with a computer, then obviously that's going to be a wonderful thing across all of our interactions with our members. So I think that's really how we're thinking about it in terms of use cases today. However, in terms of prioritizing them and getting funding, a whole different story. So I mean, it is a bit of the same argument. Is it a solution in itself, or is it just a channel? We were initially just exploring kind of what are potential use cases that we see as most impactful for our members and helping them with their health. And that was more exploratory in nature. But I think what we found is that creates a lot of variability. It might be a new intervention that we're testing. We don't understand the adoption of it. We don't understand the engagement. We don't understand the impact of what that solution might have on our members' health. And so we can't really say, is that voice or is that the solution? And so going forward, I think our focus is really going to be taking interventions that we already understand or types of support that we already understand the impact of with our members, and then bringing in voice and seeing, what's the lift we can get in adoption, engagement, or just impact over time if we use voice instead of the more traditional channels. Humana is, by nature of being a payer, very focused on the return we get. It's not necessarily always dollar signs. It could be retention. It could be, net promoter scores. But it is something that we need to demonstrate, and we need to demonstrate with lots of controls. So in terms of prioritizing things, it does kind of get back to the test approach and what can we prove the impact of.
Mm-hmm. Sarah.
So in terms of use cases, we have a couple right now, pilots in the hospital that I think in large part all get back to the value proposition of efficiency. So for our clinicians, wherever we can surface a piece of information, answer a question, pull up a policy, give them the information who's on call tonight, who's assigned to a particular bed space through voice in a very efficient manner. That's been the most attractive value prop for them thus far. We definitely started very small in the crawl, walk, run approach and, pulling up evidence-based guidelines on the Amazon show so that they don't have to dig through 10 clicks on the computer to get that same piece of information, for example. Showing them that one tiny use case and how efficient it can be at surfacing information has had them come to us with a host of other ideas that we can't really keep up with in terms of surfacing other information in an equally efficient fashion. So again, I think definitely starting small, proving the value slowly, and then adding on and working hand in hand with those that are using it to continue to show the value, make sure it fits into their workflow. The other, again, unique to a hospital is we have a couple of skills that sort of augment or facilitate processes or checklists that might already be or should already be happening in the hospital. So for example, the transplant organ verification process in the OR. It happens, we have a paper and pen checklist that they have to go through. We're able to sort of do that through voice instead and guide that verification process through voice. Similar with the safe surgery checklist, again, guiding those surgical teams through voice rather than requiring them to do pen and paper. And the value prop, in addition to efficiency and accountability, I guess there is also the value of hands-free, so not having to take off their gloves to actually do this, being able to remain fully, gowned and just interact with the Alexa and stay at the patient's bedside to do this. I think that's been another value of voice for our clinicians as well. So definitely starting small and getting momentum that way. But financial investment, it hasn't, we haven't poured money into voice by any means. We've been able to work with our partners and test this out in small ways. So, and I think we have sort of buy-in from the hospital that this is a priority and that voice is sort of the future in healthcare. And so we need to be testing it out now and getting clinicians comfortable and familiar with it so that when it really hits in a big way, we're more ready for it.
So speech is, I guess, one of the most complex functions that a human can perform. And so when you think of sort of everything that needs to come together to perform speech, you have neural integration, you have over 100 muscles that are being used for the muscular articulation, you have motor control. And so for all of these things to come together in harmony, it turns out that there are over 400 quantifiable variables that are hiding out in your speech. And so I think that's pretty exciting from a use case perspective, because you think of digital technologies and you think of analytics that you can put around this to say, what else is hiding out from a health perspective within your voice. And we heard some of the examples today. I wish I could talk about some of the most exciting top secret projects that I'm working on.
Feel
but
free.
Let me
okay with us.
the big reveal. But there are some things that I can talk about. So there's a company that's in our incubator network in Toronto, for example, called Winterlight Labs. And so Winterlight is working on an example just like that. So it's not sort of too sophisticated in the capture mechanism. Most of the voice samples they have in the data collection is really right over the phone. So don't forget phone as a great way to capture voice instead of sort of designing smart speakers and putting them in complicated spaces. There's a really easy way to get this kind of data. And so they're looking for really insights into prediction of Alzheimer's disease. And so when you look at all of those quantifiable measures, they're combining both the what you say, so the NLP processing, as well as how you say it, which are more of the tonality and vocal biomarkers that are hiding out in there. So I think it's not just a prediction mechanism, and while voice won't sort of cure Alzheimer's disease, the hope here is that you will, being able to predict it earlier will give you more insights into the understanding of the biology of the disease and really open up, hopefully, new treatment options to potentially delay decline of cognition and maybe alter that trajectory. Another example is some of the skills that we've launched in consumer related to some of our allergy medications. So if you think of Zyrtec, which is an over-the-counter allergy medication, we've launched recently as an Alexa skill that instead of just checking the weather, you can also check the allergy cast and learn a little bit of, based on your environment and some of the data that you're inputting through the Zyrtec mobile app, you can personalize a bit some of the properties of your allergy symptoms and indications, and it will give you a read of an allergy impact score to help you understand, what does the day look like and how to prepare for it accordingly. So I think it's really around information and using this kind of channel to get, again, if you're checking the weather already and it's in line with that experience, it's a very natural next step to understand that next level of detail, which is connected to it. So, other skills like babycenter.com, largest online platform for parenting in the world, owned by Johnson & Johnson. So we have a baby center skill that's really engaging with expecting parents to help them think about that parenting journey and what to expect and how to support their healthy pregnancy throughout that process.
Yeah, so I guess one observation here, there are a lot of use cases, hundreds, thousands of them. And just listening to you guys talk, I think they're kind of fall into two categories. In a clinical setting at Boston Children's, you're doing quite a lot of work to support clinical efficiency, operational efficiency in the clinic, in the facility. And I think in other industries as well, we're starting to see more of that. How do you provide a hands-free experience for a mechanic on a factory floor? So that's essentially what's going on here. The other one is more consumer and user-facing in healthcare, and I think you described some. And Jessie, that's where you've been focused, and Mayo Clinic is everything under the sun. So the last two topics, I'm going to divide it two and two because just for the sake of time. So I want to start with user experience. Voice is different. We all agree on that, and I think, Jen, you made the point of taking existing content and bringing it into a voice experience. It's a process of thought and planning. You don't just take 2 pages of text on a website and put it into Alexa. It doesn't work that way. So there's user experience considerations. I think for you two, let's focus on the user experience, and then I'll give you guys the hard ones. Okay. Let's start, Jess, with your experience in particular on the project you worked on. I think it's very interesting data from that.
Yeah, sure. So kind of just looking back on our experience over the past couple years, I mean, there are a number of things that kind of stick out in terms of challenges and ways of getting around them. So, I mean, the first for us, and keep in mind, we work primarily with Medicare-age members, so and specifically we're working with Amazon Alexa. So the first real trick is just introducing it and getting people to be open to using it. I know there's a lot of talk around seniors and tech aversion and how that's changing, but the reality is, if we're going to help our members today, we need to address tech aversion because it's a very real thing. The thing that's interesting to consider about that is that it's not necessarily that our members are trying things and finding them too difficult to use. That's actually never the problem. So it's it's less about creating an easier or simpler UI, using a jitterbug or a GrandPad or even Alexa as kind of a friction reducing approach. It's really that they're just used to using the analog tools that they've used for their whole lives, and they don't see any reason to change that. For 70 years, the tools that they've been using have been serving them just fine, and they just don't feel like trying something new. So it's a very large barrier to adoption for us, and it's been a big challenge. But there are a few ways that we've seen that work in getting around them. The first is having a physician recommend using the device. That's always number one. That's the very best. And if there's ever an opportunity for us to do that, we certainly do. The second is solving an explicit need for them. I think that we make a lot of assumptions about how people prioritize the different needs that they have in their lives. We assume that it's their priority to focus on their health. But they might have a lot of other things going on. They might be trying to pay rent. They might be caring for a loved one. And so the second big thing is just trying to understand what do they really see value in, and trying to kind of pitch that value to them. And then the third thing is just the novelty value. To be completely honest, our members, all geographies, all demographic, variables across all of them. Everyone has heard of Alexa through word of mouth. So many people have seen the commercials. It just amazed us. And there's just so much excitement around it, and so that's kind of another way of getting around the initial adoption barrier is kind of leveraging that and making sure that you keep up the momentum over time. So adoption is the first big thing. I don't want to go on too long, but one other thing for us has been just remembering the invocation phrases. It's just a challenge for everyone. The UI is in your head, so you can go straight to what you want if you know what you want. But the flip side of that is that it increases the cognitive load. You can't remember all of these invocation phrases. So there, we started with this big menu of all the different things that you can ask it. That was totally overwhelming. But what we have found works is just starting with one or two skills, one or two activation phrases. We write them out verbatim for folks. We say them together, and that seems to really help initially. And then last thing, the last big challenge that we've found is just how do we demonstrate utility and value over time to keep people engaged. And that's one that we haven't totally overcome or found ways around just yet. I think there was recently an article in the New York Times that was, Alexa, we're still trying to figure out what to do with you, and talking about how even millennials are just using it for music and weather primarily. And that's been a challenge for us, because if they aren't using it regularly, they don't remember that it's there. And we actually went so far as to develop a custom skill to try to integrate it into their routines, which has been successful for us in other places. But people kind of said to us, well, I don't need to have it as a part of my routine every day because it's something that I love and that I enjoy listening to. But it doesn't feel like it's something that I need to do every day. So that's kind of the point that we're at now, and that's a big focus for us going forward.
Jim, maybe a few comments from you on sort of your experience, user experience with the first aid skill and similar apps.
Right. I mean, user experience for us, it's an evolving process coming from the content side. We're still learning as we go, and we're trying to train our staff appropriately and to get those skills. But for example, using the example of trying to use our existing first aid content to build out the first aid skill, was a learning curve for us as well. You learn things like, well, we have to spell out for them when do you pronounce an acronym versus spell it out? Is it HIV or is it AIDS? One you pronounce the letters, one you read as a word. Mm-hmm. So that's just a very small example of something that wouldn't necessarily be caught by a coder or developer on the back end that you have, and our partners are looking to us to provide the medical expertise and the knowledge about where is this patient, where is this person now, what is the information that they really need right now, because it's been our experience that the user isn't going to the voice device as the end experience or the end knowledge. This is kind of their first contact with the problem or with an issue. It might be a first aid problem, it might be kind of, do I have diabetes, do I have this? And we're trying to provide an overview. We can't provide encyclopedic knowledge via that device because it just wouldn't be practical. You lose track after a certain amount of characters. So we're really trying to hit that sweet spot in terms of what is the optimal user experience, in terms of how long can they listen, what are the most pertinent things that we need to say in there? Is it something that if there's an emerging risk factor or symptom that they need to know about right away and seek emergency care? How can we convey that in a way that's not only urgent, that conveys the urgency, but is also geographically neutral? So these are some of all these big issues that we're looking at to provide a positive, user experience on those things. And it's continuing to inform our processes going along. But we're still, as I mentioned yesterday in my talk, we view voice as an additive channel. We still publish books. If you want to know everything about a healthy pregnancy, we've got a book for that. We still publish, a print newsletter that has high subscription rates. Some people still want to get that information. And we still have our website, and of course we still have our clinicians who are available. And so we're really trying to figure out, what's the most appropriate channel for all these different types of information and bringing it all together so it's still the same, trusted health information.
Yeah, I think just an observation on the point of designing for voice. As Jen mentioned, there are very nuanced things like being able to recognize how to pronounce or know how to pronounce a particular medical term. And these things aren't out of the box, so you have to plan for them. So we're entering in the question and answering session, but I'm going to ask the first question, and you know what it's going to be, maybe. And then we'll hand a microphone around, and yeah, thank you. And then we'll take questions from the audience. So risks associated with voice in healthcare. They range from concerns about what happens if I'm speaking over the air into a device and anybody can be listening, to securing personal information or protected health information, and being compliant with the HIPAA requirements that exist. So why don't you take the first swing at this? This is an entire presentation actually happening at 4 o'clock today. You can learn a little bit more about this. My colleague Bill Rogers will be on a panel on this topic. But let's give a flavor for what people are thinking about here.
Okay. So being a hospital, there's obviously a lot of apprehension and a lot of skeptics about incorporating voice in our hospital because devices aren't yet HIPAA compliant. And so we've had to sort of stray away from any use cases that use PHI or protected health information in any way. There's no shortage of use cases that don't leverage protected health information, but it is obviously, in designing any technology that's going to be effective, the more personalized it can be, the more integrated it is with these other systems, the more effective it's going to be. So that's been definitely a limiting factor. I would say engaging our compliance and security teams from pretty much day one has been absolutely critical. Educating them around things like what's a wake word and how long is information on a device and is it encrypted, and when it goes to the cloud, is there an auditing process that you're going to put in place to remove any sensitive information. So literally working hand in hand with them to explain every detail from a technology perspective and work with them to find ways, though right now not scalable ways, to audit and monitor and sort of make sure that no sensitive information is being stored. That's been sort of the only way we've been able to do it thus far. I think we're confident they will address HIPAA compliance at some point. And
to be clear, when you say they, you're talking about the major device and platform,
players.
Amazon
Yes.
and the like. Yeah.
Amazon, Google, yes. We're hopeful, and so I think our approach has been how can we get clinicians and patients using this in a small way even that doesn't leverage PHI in any way, get them familiar with it, learn from them what they like, don't like, how we can make it easier for them so that when it is, HIPAA compliant, we're not starting from square one there. So that's been our approach thus far.
Yeah. Cris.
I mean, the only thing I can add is really back to some of the points I made earlier around having a thoughtful strategy around what you're actually building for. And so really beginning with sort of this human-centered design and being intentional around your sort of regulatory strategy. So are you building a purely consumer product, or are you building something that's going to manage regulated data? And if so, you need to be really choiceful with your architecture, with your mediums. Are the sort of mechanisms of capturing data and managing data, up to par with handling these types of frameworks? So I would say that's one of the biggest risks. If we're going to say sort of what is the risk here, is saying, well, all the pieces are in place, let's just go. And I think that's where we've seen mobile health really draw a clear line with who is a consumer product and who is, if you look at the mobile health, sort of the app store today, you have over 500,000 to 600,000 mobile health apps that are oriented around lifestyle, wellness, and most of them are junk. I mean, most of them are not going to be around for another couple of years, and there's another 100,000 ready to be born just behind them. So I think this churn is really, I think it's a signal to noise problem. So again, the ones that have stood the test of time are the ones that have been very clear and are generating evidence behind what they're building. Some of the other things to consider if you're building sort of a company in this space, or you're developing this kind of framework, make it really easy for people to understand what they're signing up for. So having clear opt-out strategies, I think, are really critical. Having people know if they're opting into something, there is clear informed consent, there is clear mechanisms to eventually opt out and delete their data, and really knowing who's their data being shared with in a clear, easy to read, written way. So these are just some basic principles that I think we need to get ahead of in the absence of having some of these platforms already up to speed with some of the compliance perspectives. And that's all.
Good. Questions from the field? One over here.
So there's a lot of discussion around population health So a lot of discussion around population health and consumer wellness and such like that. I'm interested in your thoughts on voice applications, more as Sarah touched on, provider to provider, whether it be within the hospital organization or outside to inside, and where do you see some innovation in those areas?
Sarah, why don't you take that? That's in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, thus far, I guess, given the HIPAA compliant issue, it's been largely just an efficiency play. So we have pilots in the ICU that are focused on surfacing information, being able to page through Alexa, being able to find out who's on call or who's assigned to a particular bed space. Very, I guess, targeted, direct questions and surfacing that information, or handling administrative tasks like print this particular document. That's where we've gotten the most buy-in, I guess, from our clinicians in terms of adopting this, because it's something they're already doing. It's something that's already a part of their workflow and is probably already a pain for them to do. So any way we can make it easier has been, I guess, why they're more welcome to those types of solutions right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we focused.
Jen, do you have anything to add to that? Okay. I think there's a question in the back.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you guys for being here. I'm an undergraduate at Johns Hopkins. I'm doing research about social determinants, and I've actually read a lot about Humana's Bold Goal Initiative. So Jessie, thank you so much for all the information that you shared. Just talking about social determinants, I was just wondering if you or Humana foresee using or leveraging voice technologies to address social determinants of care when it comes to high and rising risk members.
Yeah, absolutely. Social determinants, Bruce Broussard continually repeats, social determinants are 80% of health and influence 80% of health. So it's a big focus for us. It's also very challenging. So I would say that what we're looking into now, and I mentioned earlier, focusing on explicit needs. One thing is loneliness, and how can we use voice, which really is more empathetic in nature, to provide people more companionship. So that's something that's really of interest today. Obviously, we're just exploring it, but that seems like an area of interest, as are plenty of other opportunities in terms of social service coordination, addressing food insecurity. So it's certainly a place where we're investing. I would say, just to a full disclosure, we're having a really challenging time demonstrating, the impact of those approaches in the traditional process by which we make decisions on how to scale initiatives. And that's something that is a huge organization-wide problem that we all acknowledge, but we can't figure out how to get around it. And so as much as we are investing in exploring some of those needs and how we can better address them, we really need to change as an organization to become, a company that truly is focused on the whole person and not just physical health.
I think we have time for just one more. We'll take two quickly, but we've got to wrap up.
Hi, I'm a voice designer in healthcare, and my question to you, I know you're working a lot with administration to make process improvement better in the hospital because of HIPAA compliant things, but what have you heard from your physicians or your patients of what they're demanding for voice, or how, if there was no problem with HIPAA, how can we better give a better experience to the providers and to the patients?
Is that to Sarah?
To whoever.
To whoever.
Or
Who wants to
or
take a cut at that? Sarah?
I would say I would dream up a world in which clinicians came up to me and said, I have this amazing use case for voice. It's very much us scrounging for pain points and us thinking through, does voice make sense or does another solution make sense to solve that pain point? So I don't think we have a ton of ideas that come straight from clinicians around how we can apply voice to their work. But once we think of a solution or we think of a way that it might work, walking them through it and actually showing them has been pivotal in getting them on board. We did a survey of, I think, 100 clinicians and found that only 48% were willing to, which is still pretty substantial, apply voice or try piloting voice in their clinical setting. But after walking through the process and what voice would look like in person with the remaining percentage that weren't, pretty much every single one said they would try it. Yeah. So the education piece is absolutely critical when it comes to clinicians, letting them actually see it. They have zero idea. Clinicians are brilliant in their own regard, but walking them through it and explaining to them and really showing them what it looks like is so important. There's an article in the Harvard Business Review that some folks at Sarah's organization wrote that speaks specifically, I don't know if it's that particular survey, but some of the results of what they found, how clinicians are responding to voice. So one last question there.
Yes, real quick, thank you for all your insights. I'm a digital strategist, primarily focused on healthcare professional engagement in the oncology space. And in terms of, for those of you that have had a chance to kind of pilot voice technology solutions with physicians in particular, once you land on the most opportunistic use case and you pilot something, how has the reaction been in terms of the excitement and uptake of new technology with physicians? Because we read a lot of research that shows our physicians are so overwhelmed, there's so many choices for care, that they see so many patients in a day, and so the willingness to uptake new technology is often, a little scary given how busy they are. But for those that you have had a chance to engage with physicians, how has been the willingness to uptake these new technologies, especially voice?
Sarah, I'm sorry, you're on again.
It's okay. I think that's why we've had to basically co-create with them these skills. We haven't been able to just design and build them in our lab and then bring them over and say, hey, test it out. When we have done that, it's actually quite quick for us, and we have a lot of developers that like to nerd out in voice, and so we will sometimes do that and walk them through. We did an asthma protocol skill that we just developed for fun and walked through that with a number of pediatricians, and they were like, no way, this is way too long, absolutely not, I could find this way faster. So we've had some of that, but when we really develop it with them and we focus on efficiency and we focus on what they're already doing from a workflow perspective and where this can make their life easier, that's where we've had a lot more excitement and uptake, and now we really do around that efficiency play, particularly in the ICU. We have people coming to us, and in the ED too, clinicians coming to us, hey, can you also have them text and page and do this and that? And there really is excitement, so I think starting small, proving the value, has gotten to drum up a lot more excitement.
Well, thank you guys, and thank you, audience, for all your good questions. I wish we had more time. Join me in thanking Cris, Sarah, and Jess and Jen. There are more sessions this afternoon. I'm doing one at 2 o'clock in the Tiernan Hall. There's one at 4 o'clock on healthcare. Enjoy the rest of the show.